Our presenter tonight is Bob Wolensky, and Bob and I came into contact last year through Mining Heritage Month activities. As was said before, I am the founder of Siamo. It's a local Italian-American heritage-based organization, and our mission is to preserve, protect, and promote Italian-American heritage here in northeastern Pennsylvania. So we do a lot of activities, and when Bob and I spoke last year, we thought that Mining Heritage Month would be the perfect opportunity for both what he's trying to do in preserving mining history in our area and what Siamo is trying to do. We have a lot of other events coming up that you're all invited to. In March, we will be having a St. Joseph's Day Festival at the Taylor Community Library. So there are some postcards in the back with our information, so please feel free to take that and definitely come out and see us for some of these events. But tonight's presenter, Bob Wolensky, is at the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point, and he is also an adjunct professor of history at King's College here locally in Wilkes-Barre. He is the founder of Mining History Month, and Mining History Month takes place throughout the month of January, and there's a lot of activities going on throughout the region, so definitely be sure to take advantage of some of these activities because they're really educational, and he has a calendar of events for the rest of the month. The Mining History Month activities span Lackawanna and Luzerne counties, and they're really interesting because you're getting a chance to discover something that you might not necessarily know about. And Bob's background is in Italian-American history, and tonight he's going to be presenting about the Italian-American mine workers of the northern anthracite field in Pennsylvania. So I would like to give it over to Bob right now, and just a thank you again to the Genealogical Research Society. I think you have to.
And so, why don't you do that again? Okay. We're taping this, so we need the mic. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and delighted to have you here. I'm a big fan of the Genealogical Society. I read the newsletter all the time. Rick Sedlisky is the editor of the newsletter, and it's one of the best newsletters you're going to find. And it's a great association. I didn't know about Siamo until last year. Met Stephanie up at Barnes & Noble during Meet the Authors, and she was talking about her book, Italian Americans in Northeastern PA. I was talking about my book, Anthracite Labor Wars. Do you have a copy of Anthracite Labor Wars here?
Yes, I do.
Can I hold it up?
Absolutely.
If you can find it? If you can find it? Yeah, it's, I should be selling it by the pound. It took me 15 years to write, and it weighs about 5 pounds. But it's a big history, and it's not just on Italian Americans. It's on the 26 ethnic groups that settled here and mined coal. Not everybody who came here mined coal, but we knew what the word diversity was before it became popular. Anybody from this region, I just met somebody over here who have one side's Irish, and what was the other side? Polish, which is pretty common around here. Wolensky is a Ukrainian name. I've been to the home village in Ukraine with my brother and my daughter, but my mother's side is Sicilian. And I've been to the home village in Sicily, in Cinciana. We're going to talk about it. In the sulfur mining region, and you may have heard of the town of Montedoro, Sicily, which unfortunately is the place, there we go, 15 years and many sleepless nights and tums. But there it is. Somebody wanted to see it, and I don't forget who asked me. They just wanted to have a look at it. Montedoro, where unfortunately organized crime resides in northeastern Pennsylvania since the late 1800s. We're going to talk about organized crime in here too. It means mountain of gold, Montedoro. What was the gold? Anybody know what the gold was? It wasn't gold. What was the gold in Montedoro?
Oh, that'd be coal.
Somebody said it? It wasn't coal. Sulfur, sorry. The hearing. Sulfur. Did you say sulfur?
No.
Okay.
You
You said,
said coal.
I thought I heard coal. It's sulfur. The Sicilian mine workers who came here, including up this neck of the woods, in Dunmore and other points, They were sulfur miners. So when my grandfather came here, just about a little over 100 years ago, he was a skilled sulfur miner. His name was Syracuse, S-I-R-A-C-U-S-E. It was really Siragusa. You may have heard of Tony Ziragusa, who played football for the Buffalo Bills. Tony is a distant cousin. We have relatives in Buffalo. My cousin Carl Syracuse is here tonight, and his wife Gail Syracuse. And Carl just came back from Chinchana, where he was looking for the Syracuse Bakery, which I managed to find, but it was closed the day he was there. So we've reached back to those two places. And my wife is Irish, and we've been to her hometown. And her father was born in England. We've been to that hometown, took our kids there. So I like to think that my kids are the United Nations of northeastern Pennsylvania. My wife's from Kingston. And a little bit of this, she has some French in there. Her mother's name was Campbell, so she's obviously some Scots. And they all came here. It's really a grand experiment. Think about it. Think about it. Around, let's just even say it was 1800, or let's say it was 1700, someone said, why don't we take people from all over the world and put them in this North American place, and let's see what happens. I mean, you couldn't dream an experiment like that. You couldn't concoct a human experiment like that, but we are that experiment. We are that experiment. And I think it turned out pretty good. Overall, it's not perfect, but overall, I think it's pretty doggone good. There's a lot of work to be done, but nevertheless, there it is. But one thing about that experiment is it's such an incredible history. Nobody has a better history than us, I promise you. As my one friend used to say, they might tie us, but they'll never beat us. It's really some history. Beginning with the Industrial Revolution, which was founded because of anthracite after 1830. No anthracite. Some of you have heard me say this. The Industrial Revolution takes a lot longer till the coal comes in from west of the Alleghenies. Anthracite was east of the Alleghenies. It was here. And so it fired the Industrial Revolution. It had a great impact on the Civil War, too, because the North had already industrialized a lot, which the South had not. Yeah, this is the font of the Industrial Revolution. And as some of you have heard me say as well, anthracite is found only here in these 10 counties of northeastern Pennsylvania, in this hemisphere. There's a bit here and a bit there, but this is the mother lode. Bituminous is in over 30 states. Plenty of bituminous. Alabama has bituminous. Illinois has bituminous. Iowa has bituminous. Bituminous is all over. But anthracite is only here. Germany's got some. Wales has some. China has some. But this is the huge quantity of anthracite. And it was really gold, which is why by 1901, J.P. Morgan out of New York basically owned the industry. The great monopolist, John Pierpont Morgan. I'll show you his picture in a bit. Morgan, of course, Welsh. His father was a banker in England. He became a banker over here. He put together AT&T at the turn of the century by buying up all these different companies. He put together U.S. Steel, bought out Carnegie Steel, put together the different companies. The story is that Andrew Carnegie from Pittsburgh wanted to sell his coal company, his steel companies, and Morgan bid him $500 million in 1899. They were playing golf shortly thereafter on the green there, and Carnegie says in his Scottish accent, "Mr. Morgan, I should have charged you a full $1 billion for Carnegie Steel." And Morgan said, "Yes, you should have, because I'd have paid it." That's the kind of money he owned all the anthracite railroads, Erie, DL&W, and they in turn owned the coal companies. And we're going to talk about the Erie today. So this is a rich history, and Italians are part of that. They're a greatly misunderstood part of that. And I think I might have some surprises for you in that history. Here it is. This is the region. Here we are in Pennsylvania. They're the counties where it's found, anthracite. We have soft coal out here, other side of the Alleghenies. No, this side of the Alleghenies, but late mined. There were mountains in here, of course. This is Luzerne County. This is That's actually the middle field. This is our field. This is the northern field. This was the most productive field by the end of the Civil War. Began in the lower region in Schuylkill, but by the end of the Civil War, we were the largest producer. Luzerne County was always the largest producer. I'm sorry to tell my friends in Lackawanna County. That little rivalry there, I gather from over the years. But Luzerne County was always the largest producer. Well, after the Civil War on, it was the largest producer until the Knox mine disaster. You continued mining up here after the Knox, but they really didn't down there in the middle of the valley, although Nanticoke did. I'm going to talk tonight about the Erie coal companies, and I'm going to talk about these two tenancy systems. Now stay with me on this, because it's not that complicated. You know what a tenant is? They rent. Tenants rent. One tenancy system is called the subcontracting system. You know what a subcontractor is? We have subcontractors all the time nowadays. Okay. Legal agreements between a mining entrepreneur, who are usually certified miners. They would hire 20 laborers, often their countrymen, to mine coal in one specific vein in a mine, or a half a vein. The big company would lease them the mineral rights to that vein. Men took out subcontracts, legal agreements. They began in the 1890s to enhance productivity because the subcontractor would push the men and overcome the workers' stint. The stint is the production limit. Workers only wanted to produce 2 cars a man per shift. They'd walk around like this, 2 cars. Working 3-handed, that's 6 cars a shift. Working 4-handed, a miner and 3 laborers, a miner and 2 laborers, 2 cars a man. The company wanted 3 cars a man, 4 cars a man. And the subcontractors, who they knew the countrymen, maybe they helped bring them over, maybe they helped get them a place to stay. Come on, give me that extra car. The men didn't like it. The men didn't like it. We had strikes and we had violence over this starting in the 1890s. And it continued into the 1930s. Uh-oh.
Yeah, no, move. You're in the corner there with the mouse.
Fix it up for me. Here's my technological assistant. All right. Oh, I clicked. Okay. Second kind of tenancy is the leasing system. That's where an entrepreneur gets maybe a whole mine, all the levels, 7 veins down, not just maybe 1 vein, not just the Clark or the Marcy or the Checker or the Red Ash. These different veins had names. Get the whole mine. And it's a legal agreement. And these guys, tenants, I should say leasees, had to be incorporated as business corporations. The subcontractor was not usually incorporated. No papers. They were just entrepreneurs, a miner who, sometimes bar owners took the subcontracts and hired one miner and several subcontractors. That was known. I read about one Polish bar owner who talked to the superintendent of the mine, and he got the subcontract, and he hired people, and of course he took his cut. But a leaseholder had the whole mine. Expanded into the 1930s. The effects of tenancy raised productivity. Let me show you the data. It disciplined labor. None of this stuff, or not more of this stuff, but see, all the veins there weren't enough subcontractors, so the guys who were really working with the union, and the union backed 2 cars a man, the United Mine Workers of America, the UMWA, John L. Lewis's union later on, but John Mitchell's union early on, 1890s into the 1900s. John Mitchell, of course, being buried in Scranton in Cathedral Cemetery, one of the great leaders of American labor. His statue's down in front of your courthouse. No marker for him at the cemetery, I'm very surprised to see. There ought to be a historical marker for him outside Cathedral Cemetery. He was a convert to Catholicism, which is why he's buried in Cathedral Cemetery. Disciplined labor, it enhanced management control of the workplace, because at this point, really early in the early 20th century, management decided to tighten up all of its manufacturing. Under the direction of F.W. Taylor, Frederick W. Taylor was the first efficiency expert, and he said that management's got to control all the productivity. You can't let workers on the line down on the front of the production process make decisions. This is the birth of the assembly line. We used to make cars, a team of us would assemble a whole car when they were basically made by hand. And we controlled how fast we went, and because we had the knowledge. But Henry Ford comes along under the influence of F.W. Taylor, and all I'm going to do all day long is this: put that tire on. And Henry's going to control the speed of the assembly line. I'm more likely going to go like this, because they're coming. They're coming. And that's why he could produce Ford so cheaply. And this went over to munitions, gun manufacturing, car manufacturing, steel, management control. Harder to do in a coal mine because the men are all over the mine. 7, 8, 10 levels, working in these little cubby holes. But if a subcontractor or a leaseholder is in control, it's tighter control. See, tighter control means more profits. It means to push the men. It means after you blow it, you drill, stick your dynamite in at the face, you blow it. You should go out of there after that and have your sandwich or a drink and take it easy, because that dust in there is what gives you black lung. That's what kills you. No, get right back in there and get that coal and put it right in the car. Breathe that crap in. You can't wait 10 minutes till it clears when you have a subcontractor or a leaseholder. When you're working with the union, though, that you could do that. See, you could do that. So a lot of labor and a lot of accidents or disasters because it was production. So maybe you won't prop as good as you. Propping takes time. Cleaning up the place so you don't trip and fall takes time. The companies then we want 4 cars. If you're going to take this subcontract, we want 4 cars a man. Or if the guy gets a lease on it, he tells his superintendent and who tell the mine foreman, assistant foreman, we want your men down there to be producing 4 cars a man, or else they're gone. The men fought this. With the help of the United Mine Workers of America. By 1920, John L. Lewis, the guy who had more hair in his eyebrows than I have on my head. He was famous for these eyebrows, Great flowery speech. John L. Lewis. He was with them for a while, but then his story begins to change. The Erie Coal Company was the main purveyor of both tenancy systems. You know the Erie Coal Company? Sure you do. You've been to Cooper's in Scranton. That's the main Erie terminal in Scranton. That's right. We lost Cooper's down there in Pittston, I'm sorry to say. But the one in Scranton is where that was the Erie main terminal in this neck of the woods. Then you get the Erie-Lackawanna later on when they merged. But Erie was founded in the late 1800s. Jay Gould was involved. It was a wild and woolly, corrupt company. Erie was always a corrupt company. It bought the Pennsylvania Coal Company, which was based in Dunmore, and it bought the Hillside Coal and Iron Company, which was also there. It's among the highest dividend returns. We have data on their return. From 1902, they were paying 20 and 30 and 40% a year return on stock, way above the other companies. Hillside Pay, which was much smaller, Hillside only had about 4 collieries. Erie had 8 collieries. It paid a little bit less, but there were years when they had 40% return. Among the lowest wages paid, however. We have the data from the companies, and you can compare Hudson with DL&W, which became Glen Alden, and you can compare them. Erie was very, very low wages. So the highest profits and the low wages. It was a push-push, go-go company. A trail of corruption throughout the 1800s, bankrupt a number of times, reorganized. It was known for robbing the stockholders, especially English stockholders. Some companies back then in the robber baron era of the Gilded Age, they would rob the customers. But Erie was famous for robbing the stockholders because they were across the ocean, and so they'd print a lot of stock, and the stock would be worth less, but they were still charging the high price. They were always in trouble, Erie was. And I'm going to tell you that by the first decade of the 20th century, they had forged a relationship with the Pittston mob. I'm having troubles here with this thing. Okay. I went back to the 1890s and examined all the Erie Railroad records I could find. They're at the State Archives in Harrisburg, at the Scranton Museum here, and they were with a gentleman named Stuart Milner, who was in the old Erie, the old Pennsylvania Coal Company office, which has just been torn down, I'm devastated to say. DeNaples owns it right by the DeNaples junkyard down there. Couldn't believe tore down the Pennsylvania Coal Company office, over 100-year-old building. We just tore down the Huber, so why should I be surprised? See, this history is not worth preserving. No. The Battle of Archbald was one of the first things I discovered, 1897. What else happened in 1897? The largest labor massacre of the 20th century, Latimer. Latimer by Hazleton, the largest labor massacre of the 20th century, where 19 men were shot in the back, marching peacefully, led largely by Italian Americans, something that's been lost from history, but it's in my book. I actually reconstruct, I found their language. They actually used the broken ing, and how they led the march there. And Sheriff Martin was there with his deputized, largely British and German men, and there were these, the marchers were mainly Slavic, Polish, Slovak, Ukrainian, Russian. There were some Lithuanians there. Lithuanians are not Slavs, but they were there at that time. Slavic tribes. You know, we're all tribal at one time, right? We're all in tribes and clans at one time in human history. It was the main way to organize it. The Scots still do that. You know, they have their clan, their tartans and whatnot. We were all tribal at one time, believe me, but not that long ago. We have Hmong in Wisconsin, Hmong. They were our allies in Vietnam. They're Asian. They're pre-industrial people, and they're still very much in clans. And within their different regions of they were in Thailand. Well, in any case, the Battle of Archibald happens here when the Italian-American mine workers did not like the fact that the company Pennsylvania Coal Company decided to subcontract out to these different subcontractors who were mainly English and Welsh. They were doing well, they were producing even more than a couple cars, but suddenly they wanted to produce more cars, and these guys were going to get 6 cents a ton off of everything produced. And the Italian-American mine workers said, no, we're not going to do it. These guys, why do we need these subcontractors? We're working for the company just fine for the past few years. And the company in the newspaper said, for safety. They said, safety? These guys are the first guys to leave as soon as there's any hint of trouble. So they went on big strike. Out came a private detective agency hired by the company, not the Pinkertons, but something like the Pinkertons. And there was a big clash. And we almost had Latimer up here in 1897, but they had to wait till the fall to have it down below. They were on strike. There were marches. They had guns aimed at them. Luckily, nobody ever fired. They were living in company housing. To make the long story short, the Italians lost the battle, kicked out of the housing, and they were fired. A little-known Battle of Archibald, 1897. The first that I've been able to find of the Italian-American mine workers fighting back against these tenancy systems, but we ain't seen nothing yet. In 1900, major anthracite strike. John Mitchell's around then. Father Curran is around then. Monsignor John J. Curran, we had a meeting, a program for him last Thursday at King's, the annual King's lecture during Mining History Month. Actually, we can pass some of these around. This is the Mining History Month schedule. And Curran was Bishop Hoban's envoy to the strike, because by 1900, 1902, most of the workers were Catholic. Eastern and Southern Europeans. You may know that Pope Leo XIII wrote Rerum Novarum, an encyclical in 1890, the condition of the working class in America. Pope Leo XIII, smart man, realized he was going to lose the working class in the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s. We're all working in factories, right? Well, not all, but get the point. We're going to lose them to communism or socialism, which is also gaining leaps and bounds. Marx writes the Communist Manifesto in 1848. Okay? So he says, look, workers need fairness. They need wages. We're making zillions of dollars, and they're not getting any of it. It's going to these rich owners. So the Pope went on the side of the workers in 1890, and he advocated unions. He said unions are the only way they're going to get a fair share. No one's going to give you a big raise out of the goodness of their heart. Furthermore, if I decide in my coal company to give you a big raise and treat you well, my competitor won't. Whose stock are they going to buy? His. And they're going to sell mine. So if we unionize the whole industry, they all have to pay the wages and the benefits. So nobody has a competitive advantage. The Catholic Church is still on record supporting labor unions, although I can't say that I've heard it preached from the pulpit on any Sunday in my lifetime. But it's an official church policy if you look. That was with the 1902 strike and so Hoban's there and the 100 strike. Hoban is representing Bishop Hoban, who's reading Pope Leo XIII, and so the church is on the side in these two magnificent strikes. I shouldn't say magnificent, but they were magnificent. It's the first time the federal government got involved, Teddy Roosevelt by 2002, and didn't take the side of the company. Before 2002, the federal government would send in troops to break strikes. Not in 2002. Teddy played an even role, even-handed role. In fact, he grew very close to Monsignor Curran. Curran's mentioned twice in his autobiography. Curran would visit him in New York at his estate when he retired. And when he began the Bull Moose Party, Teddy ran for president after taking a term off. He ran again as a third-party candidate in 1912. He took over after McKinley's death in 2002, in 2001, and then he ran again in 2004. And in 2008, he wasn't going to run, but he could have. And so he let his vice president, Taft, take over, and Taft promised to keep Teddy's progressive ideas going. Teddy was a progressive Republican. Education, national parks, regulate these monopolies, tame the railroads, who were the monsters of the day. Teddy was a progressive. He had some other problems, but he was quite progressive. He wanted workers to be paid fairly. He was not opposed to unions. Taft turned out to be the opposite. Teddy runs in 2012. He begins the Bull Moose campaign in Wilkes-Barre with Father Curran at his side. He siphons off enough Republican vote from Taft to allow Woodrow Wilson to win the election of 1912, and that's how Woodrow Wilson becomes president of the United States, because Teddy split the Republicans. Curran was right there with him. Curran is a well-known priest, and we're trying to do much more about him in anthracite history. There's Teddy, taming the coal operators who he wasn't too happy with. He was invited to the White House, and he said he wanted to throw one of them, Bayer, out the window. He says this in his biography. He was so mad at him. They're arrogant. Coal owners are arrogant. Here's the main ones. Here's the main ones in 1902. Have a look at them. I'm going to give you their names now. E.B. Thomas, Erie. George Bayer, Philadelphia and Reading. William Truesdale, you heard of the Truesdale Colliery. DL&W. Bottom row, Fowler, the New York, Ontario, so forth. Oliphant, the Delaware Hudson, and Walter. Now, what kind of names do we have up here? Thomas, Welsh. Bayer, German. Truesdale, English. Fowler, English. Oliphant, English. And Walter, probably English, could be German. I don't see any of these newcomers up there. The British that have always dominated this industry up here. The Germans come in, they were the first ones here. The Germans came in right around the same time the Irish did, 1840s, 1830s. And the Italians and the Poles and the Lithuanians, they don't come till after the Civil War. They don't come till after Civil War ends in 1865. And why do they want to bring over all these Southern Eastern Europeans? Because the owners thought they didn't know beans about unions. That's why. They were peasants, most of them. Although the Poles knew how to mine, the Ukrainians had some mines, the Russians did, and I said the Sicilians knew how to mine. But a lot of them, most of them didn't know how to mine. And so they didn't know about unions, so the owners thought, so we'll bring over these people, and it'll put the kibosh to these other miners who were already here. And they were British and German. And I have to include the Irish. My apologies to my Irish friends, but I got to include the Irish as British until 1922, when they got some independence. That's a joke. That's a joke. No love lost there. Although the Queen just visited Ireland and they're trying to make nice. But yeah, that's why they sent people over, scouts. I have in the book one lady who was coming from Lackawanna County. She would recruit in northern Italy, and she would bring over, she was known as the Regina, which in Italian means queen. And she would bring over several Italian immigrants she ran a boarding house, and then she would work with the companies to place them. She was an entrepreneur. She was Italian herself. Okay? So that's what a lot of our ancestors actually came here as strike breakers, or at least union busters. I'm sorry to tell you that too. But they didn't know it until they often got here. Yeah, that was the battle. Management versus labor, and whether we want to recognize it or not, the Brits against the Eastern and Southern Europeans. The Irish, who were not accepted at all in 1840, 1850, 1860, they worked their way up, so that they finally become really part of the British way of thinking about these people over here. As Bayer said to them, George Bayer, that these Slavic miners really, we shouldn't even worry about them suffering or breathing bad. They can't even speak English, he said. So that's what he said. So let me see here. There's Bayer right there. Quite an arrogant guy. But these are Victorian gentlemen. These are proper, they believe in aristocracy. They believe in rank. They believe in social Darwinism. The survival of the fittest. And they ran the world in 1890, the Brits did. You've heard the phrase that Britain waves the rules. I mean, Britain rules the waves. I'm sorry, that was a slip. I'm sorry, that's a slip. Yeah, they ran the world, and there was this rank, and that was not just them, but everybody thought this. In fact, Hitler thought it into the 1920s and 30s, right? That the German they were the superior race, the Aryans. This racial thinking is very dangerous stuff, as you well know. But I want you to know, I'd like you to read the book, How the Irish Became White. And read the book, Are Italians White? And read the book, Jews White? ? They're all online. You could find these books, they're recent books. It's in the whiteness literature, because the Irish were not white. They were not considered white really until the late 1800s, when other people start coming here, and maybe the Irish aren't so bad compared to these guys. Yeah, the idea of whiteness as we know it is really a phenomenon after World War II. Whiteness is the whites are worried about the Mexicans now. If you know your history, it's just ridiculous to think about that. Every ethnic group who was here before them were worried about them. Now, in this neck of the woods, we've all intermarried, and so now we're all white. But our ancestors weren't considered, Italians were not considered white early on. Many of them had very dark skins. You know what even Italians say? That Italy ends at Rome. Everything south of there is Africa or the Middle East, with all those dark-skinned people. Even to this day in Italy, that's often said about the Southerners. Southerners are very discriminated against in Italy, the Sicilians and the Neapolitans and so forth. Yeah, so you got to understand that whiteness literature. That's really only a phenomenon, and it really took off the whiteness during the civil rights movement of the 1960s. As blacks made more and more progress in the 60s with civil rights, the whites began to coalesce and defend what they have. And ladies and gentlemen, I think you're seeing the continuation of that whiteness problem in the recent election. I think the whiteness issue is still very much with us. But now we're all white. And now they're the ones we got to worry about, right? In this mix are African Americans. Now, we had a talk last week at Wilkes. There's a lot of African American miners in anthracite that we're just now discovering. Christine Patterson came up from Atlanta, spoke at Wilkes last Friday. It's broadcast on PCN. Maybe you can catch it, the state cable news network. Someone saw it. Christine is the niece of Edgar Patience, the famous anthracite sculptor. They've got his things down at the museum here in Scranton. And King's has this magnificent altar at the King's Chapel made of anthracite, crosses on it, and these different symbols, Christian symbols on it. Sits this high, one solid block of coal. And Edgar Patience, African American, he never worked in the mines, but his father did. And there are a lot of African American miners that Christine Patterson is writing about right now, and there's going to be a book about that. That's an ethnic group that we have to bring back. We have to really bring back into the mix because they've been forgotten. I'm sorry to say. Okay. So yeah, we get these guys. Whiteness. Who's white? There's Mr. Morgan, who owned the whole industry by 1901. Well, I say he owned the main part. There was still some independents out there, but he probably owned, 80 or 90% of it. Nothing like those monopoly profits. That was Morgan's philosophy. Was he in favor of capitalism? He said he was. But you need competition for capitalism. Did he want competition? He didn't want competition. He wanted monopoly. Then he could set the price. The courts eventually broke up his monopoly.
Did he have acromegalia where the nose keeps...
He ended up with, what's the term?
Acromegalia.
Acromegalia with a big bulbous nose. Yeah. The Erie had to eventually sell off the coal companies after there was continual suits in the courts suing them for monopoly. Underwood. Don't you guys live on the old Underwood Colliery? My cousin and his wife live, there's a development in the old Underwood Colliery. A Pennsylvania Coal Company, of course. He was president of the company. Underwood would be an English name. There's John Mitchell, always dressed like a priest, even though he wasn't at the time. Never was, but he wasn't even a Catholic when this was done. He leads the strike of 00 and 02, and he was the president in 08, and he dies in 1919. But he was the one that said, you don't mine Irish coal or Polish coal or Lithuanian coal, you just mine coal. And he brought all these miners together, much to the surprise of the companies, because they brought these people over here. We figured we'll divide them and conquer them. And they don't know about unions in the first place. Well, they caught on very quickly. They learned from the Irish and the Welsh and the Scots and the English and the Germans who were here trying to establish a labor union. So suddenly, under Mitchell, we have this solidarity across the ethnic groups, which the companies didn't know what to do with. Oh, yes, they did. That's when they started subcontracting and leasing. Here we have Teddy with Bishop Hoban and John Mitchell and Father Curran. Many pictures with all three of these guys.
Where was that taken?
That picture was taken in Scranton. I think it says so on the, it says...
The bishop's residence.
It's the bishop's residence, yes it is. Yeah. Breaker boys, we know what they were. Teddy was in favor of putting them in schools. This picture is taken by Hine, H-I-N-E, from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, by the way. He was hired by the anti-child labor people to take pictures of children working in mills and mines, on ships, working for the oyster business, all over the place, farms. And they were a big movement in the early 1900s to get rid of child labor, which was a huge problem. Here's some more. This is Lewis Hine's collection, Library of Congress. That's the Ewan Colliery in Pittston. This is where the Knox mine disaster happened, at the Ewan Colliery. Where was I? There we are. Yeah, no school for these guys. Here's the former Erie Coal Company office in Dunmore, torn down, what, 2 years ago? Pity, 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 owned by De Naples. The manager of the Erie Coal Company was William May. Now, May was English. Manager for a number of years, lived in Scranton. A few of the breakers they built. Now, they argued that we were investing billions of dollars, and they were. Then they said millions, but it would be billions today. Dunmore, number 5. Number 6, Santo Volpe, the top mob boss, eventually buys this from them in the 30s. Number 14, Port Blanchard, Jenkins Township near Pittston. The old forge, a lot of investment. There's the Ewan again, different angle. The Barnum and Duryea. Again, 12 collieries. I don't have pictures of all of them. There's a Loki, a yard locomotive called a Loki. There's one up at the museum, Hudson. Things were tough here after the '02 strike. The men won a 10% wage increase, but the companies weren't honoring it. It was a big strike, 6 months. When Teddy Roosevelt intervenes and he establishes this board to hear all the complaints, the Board of Conciliation, and they were hopeful, but the board took the side of management all the time, it seemed, and the wages weren't going up. So some people, especially the Italian mine workers, invite in the Wobblies. Have you heard of the Wobblies, the so-called Wobblies? The industrial workers of the world. Quite a radical union. Consisted of anarchists, some socialists, and some communists. And some folks who just wanted fairness in the workplace. So they come in here. John L. Lewis is already established with the UMWA, but here comes these really radical guys. And some was saying that Lewis was not defending the mine worker enough. Luigi Galliani comes in, top organizer, multilingual, spoke several languages. He's right here in this area, organizing for the IWW. He gets most support among the Italian-American mine workers up here. He had about 5,000 members in the IWW. Now, I want to tell you, we had 60,000 mine workers between the upper part of the field, Carbondale and up that way, and then the lower part, which is down